has to do with a consecration of the idea that the solution to this whole question is somehow an extension of an entity that has been created in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip. And I would like to think that that might be possible, but having spent time every year for the past more than 2 decades in the occupied territories in Israel, I frankly think that that is completely unrealistic. I don't think that the necessary prerequisites for dismantling the occupation and dismantling Israeli control of the occupied territories are in place. And I don't think we're anywhere near having those things. On the contrary, the dynamic is entirely in a different direction. The dynamic is for the incorporation of much or most of the occupied territories permanently into Israel, the implantation permanently of a population which is now more than 1 in 11 Israeli Jews, and will probably grow to a larger proportion of that if Israel continues on the path that it's been on for over 40 years. So saying somehow that there's going to be a state of Palestine, unfortunately, to my way of thinking, reinforces the illusion that it's there already in embryo. It's not there in embryo. What's there in embryo is a greater Israel. That is the dynamic of the last 43 years. The Palestinians have resisted this. The Palestinians have never accepted this. Many Israelis do not accept this. In fact, most Israelis may or may not want it, but they're not the ones who are calling the shots. They're not the ones who are determining spending more money on the settlements per capita by a factor of I don't know how much than on other Israelis, poorer Israelis, back in Israel. They're not the ones who are devoting resources to security and military and intelligence efforts that maintain the Palestinians under control. The people who are in charge of those things are hell-bent for the continuation and completion of this process. And I'm afraid that this and other similar resolutions simply don't address that issue, that we are on the way to a one-state solution created by Israel. We are not on the way to a two-state solution. We are riding hell-bent for leather, faster than any of us realize, towards an unbreakable one state. What nature that state will have, only God knows. I have no idea. What its nature is now is the hegemony of one group over the other. Whether they are citizens or not, anybody who arrives in Israel who is Jewish has rights. Anyone who is not, whether they're a Russian immigrant who's not Jewish or whether they're Arabs, have lesser rights. Differing levels of lesser rights. If you're an Israeli citizen, much more than a Jerusalem resident. If you're a Jerusalem resident or a Golan Heights resident, much more than a West Banker or a Gaza. But all of them have inferior rights. That's the system that's there, and that's the system that is now being concentrated and made firmer. And one of the problems with this is that this initiative is that it, I think, takes attention away from that hardening reality. The other thing that it may do is that it may lead to a consecration of an idea that the problem of Palestine is confined to the 4 million Palestinians who live in the occupied territories, or possibly the 5.5 or so who live under Israeli control, whether as Israeli citizens or as residents of the occupied territories. This is a minority of the Palestinian people. Most Palestinians live outside of historic Palestine. Most Palestinians are not Israeli citizens, residents of Jerusalem, or residents of the occupied territories. Most Palestinians live outside the occupied territories in Israel. And anything that continues to delude people into thinking that the problem will be resolved when the problem of the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, in 1967 is resolved, is, in my view, problematic, at the very least. There are other issues having to do with the PLO, other issues having to do with the enhancement of the authority of the Palestinian Authority, which are, to my mind, very problematic. I will leave those aside because there's a question of time. I think I don't have a few more minutes. About 5? About 5? Okay, good. So I invite you to ask me questions about those other problems, should that be enough.